All right, this is 2 Kings chapter 2, verse 1. When the Lord was about to take Elijah up to heaven in a whirlwind, Elijah and Elisha were on their way from Gilgal. Elijah said to Elisha, "Stay here, the Lord has sent me to Bethel." But Elisha said, "As surely as the Lord lives and as you live, I will not leave you." So they went down to Bethel. And a company of prophets at Bethel came out to Elisha and asked, "Do you know that the Lord's going to take your master from you today?" "Yes, I know," Elisha replied, "so be quiet." And then Elijah said to him, "Stay here, Elisha, the Lord has sent me to Jericho." But Elisha replied, "As surely as the Lord lives, and as you live, I will not leave you." And so they went to Jericho, and a company of prophets at Jericho went up to Elisha and asked him, "Do you know that the Lord is going to take your master from you today?" "Yes, I know," he replied, "so be quiet." And then Elijah said to him, "Stay here, the Lord has sent me to the Jordan." But Elisha replied, "As surely as the Lord lives and as you live, I will not leave you." So the two of them walked on. 50 men from the company of the prophets went and they stood at a distance, facing the place where Elijah and Elisha had stopped at the Jordan. And Elijah took his cloak, rolled it up, struck the water with it. The water divided to the right and to the left, and the two of them crossed over on dry ground. And when they'd crossed, Elijah said to Elisha, "Tell me, what can I do for you before I am taken from you?" "Let me inherit a double portion of your spirit," Elisha replied. "You have asked a difficult thing," Elijah said. "Yet if you see me when I am taken from you, it will be yours. Otherwise, it will not." Man, Elisha's a little eager beaver, isn't he? Man, he is ready for everything. He's here for all the things. He's like, let's go. I mean, three different times, Elijah turns to Elisha and says, "Well, the Lord's sending me over here. You say here." No, no, no. Every single time Elisha says, "As surely as the Lord lives, I will never leave you. Continue to mentor me. Continue to guide me forward in this ministry that I'm stepping into." Two different times, groups of prophets come up to Elisha, and in essence, they ask him, "Do you have any idea what you're getting yourself into? It's been revealed to us," the prophets are saying, "that Elijah, your mentor, your master, the one who's been doing all of this crazy ministry, is about to be taken from you." And Elisha says, "I know, shut up, just go away. I'm here for it," right? When Elijah turns to Elisha and says, "What do you need from me in the midst of all of this?" Elisha says, "Give me the double portion of inheritance." Now that might sound weird to you, but that's Old Testament language that conveys the imagery of a son who turns to his father and says, "I'm ready to inherit the family business and all that comes with it. I've seen the work that you've done. Pass on the work to me. Give me the double portion of inheritance that comes to the firstborn son that you have." When Elijah turns to Elisha and says, "You have asked a difficult, hard, tedious thing," Elisha just stands there not even blinking. "Let's go," is what he's saying. Man, he's a little eager beaver, isn't he? Elisha is the epitome of what I would call the "here am I" guy, all right? When you read the Old Testament, if you spent any time in the Old Testament, there are moments where men and women are called by God to step into the story, to step into a mission that He has set apart for them. And there's a number of men and women, when they hear that call from God, they step forward just unashamedly, chest puffed out, and they declare, "Here am I, send me." Elisha is the epitome of that kind of person. He is the epitome of the "here am I" guy. Let's do this. And what I think is so fascinating about Elisha, the prophet, to be so "here am I," what's fascinating is we have come a long way from the very first prophet in the Old Testament, the very first person who was called by God to speak for God to the people. I'm talking, of course, about Moses, the first of a long line of prophets. And it's hard for me, as I've been studying this whole story of Elijah in preparation for the weeks of CIY that I was going to do, it's always hard for me to read the story of both Elijah and Elisha and not find myself thinking about Moses. Not just because they're all prophets, and Moses happens to be the first prophet, but think about all of the connecting points that they have. Have you noticed them? I mean, having to take on a world power, Moses had to do that too. I mean, having to see great signs and wonders in the heavens to break the back of the enemy. Moses had to see that too. A couple days ago when I talked about 40 days and 40 nights, remember how the people of Israel wandered in the desert for 40 years? How about in our text just now, where they touch the tip of the water and they part to the right and the left? Does that remind you of something, right? The Red Sea, it reminds you of Moses. I can't help but think of the very first prophet in his story. Exodus 3, Moses was tending a flock out in the middle of the desert. And he came to Horeb, remember Horeb, the mountain of God, and there the angel of the Lord appeared to him in flames of fire from within a bush. Moses saw that though the bush was on fire, it did not burn up, and so he thought, I think I'm going to go over and see this strange sight, why this bush is not burning up. And the Lord saw him and called out to him, Moses, Moses, and it starts out good. Moses says, guess what? Here am I. Here am I. And then the Lord said, Moses, I have indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt, how they are enslaved underneath Pharaoh. I have heard their crying out because of their slave drivers, and I am concerned about their suffering. So I have come down to rescue them from the hand of the Egyptians and to bring them out of the land into a good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey. And so now go, Moses, I'm sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. And Moses said to God, who am I? Who am I? Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt? Do you have any idea who I am, God? I mean, who am I to be sent off and to speak before not even just the Egyptians, but the Israelites themselves? They're going to wonder who I think I am to declare anything at all, let alone say that I'm speaking for you and that there will be great signs and wonders. Who am I? Do you know the kinds of things I did back in Egypt and why I'm in the middle of a desert serving as a shepherd? I murdered something. Who am I? You know, maybe if you've read the story of Moses, he goes a step forward and he says, God, I don't know if you know this about me, but I don't talk all that great. I'm not eloquent. The Hebrew language there actually is Moses saying to God, I got a fat tongue. Like I can't get the words out. I don't even really know how to talk. Have you considered maybe sending someone else? Like Moses, seems like my brother Aaron. He talks great. He's eloquent. Send him. Amazing preacher. Who am I to be sent to reach anyone and break the back of evil? Who am I? Moses becomes, for me, in my eyes, has been so helpful for me in my world. He's the epitome of the who am I guy, right? The epitome of the who am I guy. And he's ministered to me because that has been who I have been in my life. Significant fear, significant anxiety in any moment that we have a moment like we had last night, okay? And now the mission is handed to you. Now the mission is given you to go and to reach people, right? Guys, I can remember years ago when I was at my own CIY conference. It was at Milligan University down in Tennessee. And I remember on the very first night, they were preaching the sermon, they got done, it was time for an invitation. And it wasn't just an invitation to whether or not you wanted to follow Jesus, but do you sense a calling in your life to go and to serve the kingdom in some way, shape, or form, be it anything really, and maybe even ongoing local church ministry. And I remember I thought to myself that I was feeling something in me that was as if I needed to go forward for that call. And yet my response was, And that's not just me saying no, that's me trying not to puke. Like, I don't want to go. The second night, the same thing happens. The invitation's giving. I feel a pull, and my response is, because my response is, who am I? The third night, the same thing happens, the same response. Who am I? And I'm coming up with more and more excuses. I've got a father he taught for 40 years in the seminary, at the graduate school, at the university where I now work. Brilliant mind. Everywhere I go, they would tell me, brilliant preacher, brilliant teacher. And I thought, who am I? Have you considered just continuing to do what you're doing through my father? Or have you considered some of the other people in the youth group? They'll be so much better at this. But finally, on the final night, I remember it was actually Matt Clark, our director's father-in-law, J.K. Jones, was preaching. And he gave a sermon and gave the invitation and finally said, okay, I give up. But as much as I wanted to be here am I was still more of a who am I. This has been my battle, not just then, but all throughout my ministry. That at every call that I have to step deeper into the story, my initial response is always, it's who am I? Who am I? And the call within ministry, the call for us to plant a church on the west side of Indianapolis, my immediate response was, who am I? And yet we felt the call and we answered. I remember people coming up to me and saying, man, starting a new church, I have no idea what I would do. And I'm like, I don't either. Who am I? Now in this moment where I find myself working again at the university that I attended among people who taught me the call to do that, and I thought, who am I to step into this role? Guys, I felt the same thing when CIY gives me a call and says, would you like to do some speaking this summer? No. Who am I? Who am I? And I'm the epitome of the who am I guy. I confess that to you. How about you? You a who am I person? Man, I don't know, last night, we've got these tiles here with these names, these different ministry contexts, and over here, the same one. You fill that out. In the moment of missional fervor, like you're so excited, like I am called to go back the way that I came, just like Elijah, and I'm going to reach if only just one, or my family, or I'm going to go back to my school, or go back among the sports team. And you wrote that down last night with so much confidence. And maybe this morning when you're walking in, you see it up here, and you're like, oh, what did I do? Because there's something about writing it down that makes it so specific, that makes it so real, that makes it so much of a commitment. And you wake up in the morning and you wipe the sleep from your eyes and you're terrified, and with great fear and trembling, you look at what you wrote down, and your immediate response with fear and trembling is, but who am I? I don't know. Who am I? And I don't know what it's like for you, but that's what it's like for me. Whenever I'm called, it doesn't matter if it's one-on-one ministry or if it's a whole group of people or speaking at COI, that's always, if I'm not careful, the very first question I have, who am I to do this? And Moses, the who am I guy, that's my speed, that's my lane, that's where I go. Elisha, the here am I guy, man, that's too bold for my blood at times. And yet, is it really fair for me to be almost kind of picking on Elisha for being so confident, for being the guy who recognizes when the cloak is wrapped around him and he stands among Elijah and he wonders, is this actually a calling in my life? This seems to be what God wants me to do. For him to step forward and to be so dramatically and emphatically, here am I. Is it really all that bad? Because what he has done, just simply what he has done, is he has stepped into a story that makes sense to him because he knows the rest of the story of the prophet among prophets. He knows how everything played out, not just the moment where Moses had doubts and wondered who on earth he was to take on this task. But he remembers everything that unfolded on Mount Horeb. He remembers everything that the Lord did. Because what ended happening, if you remember what ends up happening in the story of Moses, is God replaces that pushback question of Moses with an even greater one, doesn't he? He puts Moses in his place. Moses comes along to set in God and says, who am I? Who am I? And what God comes along there, I mean, Moses even says, when I go to the people, who am I supposed to say I am and what I'm even up to? And God thunderously says to him, suppose you go to the Israelites? Well, here's what you say. You tell them about me. You tell them that you've been sent by the I am. Tell them I am who I am. This is what you say to them. And tell them that this is my name forever, the name that they are to call me from generation to generation to generation. You go to them and you declare to them that you know the one true God who was and is and always will be. And you let them know that it is I who have come down and rescued them. And by great signs and wonders in the heavens, I will break the back of those who have enslaved you. That's what you tell them. Father, God is incredibly annoyed with Moses later on when Moses once again says, pardon me, God, but once again, could you maybe find a different servant? What God just is trying to thunderously say, who are you to think you're the one ultimately who's being sent? Because if you listen closely to the call of Moses in Exodus chapter 2, it does not begin with, I'm going to be sending you. What does God say first? I have heard the cries of my people and I have come down to rescue them. I have come down to rescue them. And what God does in this moment in which he's calling Moses to step into the story, and Moses says, who am I? Is God is saying to him and to every prophet to come and to every prophet that even includes us, the question you ask is not who you are, it is always who is God. What God says to Moses is not about who you are, it's who I am. And I am the I am. I was and I am and I always will be. And the I am goes with you, before you, behind you, is within you. So one true God. And Elisha understands this. He's taken seriously the story of Moses, the prophet among prophets. And what Elisha realizes is he can puff out the chest and he can say in the midst of the calling, here am I, because he knows the I am is here. Because he knows the I am will go with him and empower him. It's all in what Elisha asks for. Elijah turns to him and says, what do you need from me before I am taken from you? And what Elisha says is, give me the double portion of your spirit. And what Elisha is saying there, guys, is hear this. He's not saying, I want to kind of walk and talk like you do. Give me the same spirit of you. No, what he's saying is, Elijah, call out to God that I might have the spirit of God. Because what Elisha knows is all the stories of the history up to that point. And he knows that wherever the Spirit of God has rested on a man or a woman, things, once again, as I talked about a few days ago, always break toward breakthrough and beauty for the rule and reign of God. Everywhere where the Spirit rests on these individuals. And Elisha knows that if I gain that, if the I am goes with me, then the question is not who am I? The emphatic declaration is here am I, for the I am goes with me. And you see, guys, listen. This is you. This is what has been given to you. You know, you hear this call to step into the story, and you write down the names, and you wake up this morning and you have fear and trembling. But the double portion rests on you, and the Spirit rests on you. I mean, this is the beautiful promise in the Old Testament. Yes, there was a segment of history, a time of history, and it did stretch for hundreds of years, where the Spirit of God and His power rested on just a handful of individuals. But there came another prophet by the name of Joel. And one of the greatest chapters, I think, in the Bible is Joel chapter 2, where God says through Joel to the people of Israel, He said, one day I will pour out my Spirit, not just on individuals, and not just on people like Moses or Elijah or Elisha, but on all people. But on all people. And if you fast forward all the way to Acts chapter 2, that is exactly what happens. I mean, just amazing things transpire right there in the middle of Jerusalem. And all of a sudden, men, women, young, old are doing things they could never do before. And Peter stands up and he clears his throat and he says, you knew this was coming because of Joel chapter 2. When God said one day, I will pour out my Spirit on every man, every woman, every child who calls out to me in belief, and they will have visions, and they will have dreams, and such things will unfold on this earth that will turn the kingdoms of this earth inside out, upside down, and tear them down from the top down. This is the power unfolding already with what Jesus says in the Gospel of John. He said, after me will come another. He's talking about the Spirit. And in the moments when you are terrified, he says to the disciples, about whether or not you know what to say and what you need to do, the Spirit will rest on you in power and will give you the words to say. It will help you recall what needs to be shared. It will empower you to be who you need to be, that the strongholds are broken. And knowing that the double portion rests on you, and knowing that the Spirit rests on you, and not just on a handful of people, what you have to realize then is wherever and to whomever you have called to go, you go. And when you get there, whatever you have been called on to say, you say it. And what you're called to pray, you pray it. And how you're called to serve, you serve. And how you're called to give, you give. And how you're called to love, you love. And how you are called on to tell the story, that their story is rewritten, that in the rewriting of their story, other stories might be rewritten, and on and on and on again, because the Spirit rests on you, my friends. The Spirit rests on you. There will be moments, not just in this hour, in this place, not just tonight. There will be quiet moments when you get in the van, you head home, or the bus, and you head home. You'll be sitting in your room, and once again, it'll sneak in. You'll wonder, what have I gotten myself into? And you will say, man, who am I? And look, I want to tell you, it's okay to wonder that question aloud. Who am I? But it can't be. If it's the first question, fine. But guys, it can't be the last. It's okay if the first question is, who am I? But the last question is this: who is he? Who is he? And the answer to that last question and the prevailing question is, he is the I am. And he goes before you, he goes after you, he is with you, he is within you. And the only response you have then is, here am I. Here am I. The thing you do is you go, my friends. You go. And not because you believe in yourself, but because you believe in the one who is in you. Man, this mission you're called to, he empowers you. Don't you forget it. And may the rallying cry for us all be, here am I. Even if with a little bit of fear and trembling. I love you, and I mean that. And I am grateful for you and for the work the Spirit's already doing through you and will do through you for years to come to break strongholds for me.